I.
I.
Hello, grade 11s. So today we are going to be doing the biodiversity of animals, part one, focusing on the symmetry, civilization, and tissue layers. So we're going to be focusing on the body features of organisms. So I'm going to first start by explaining to you guys the terminologies. So we know what a phylogenetic tree is. A phylogenetic tree is a diagram showing the evolutionary relationships, right? It shows the evolutionary relationships between the ancestral group. So it's between the ancestral group and the organisms and their descendants. It's very much important that you know definitions so that when they give you the biological the definition, you're able to give them the biological term. So a phylogenetic tree shows evolutionary relationships between ancestral groups or organisms and their descendants. Right. And then we have something called a phylum. A phylum is a taxonomic rank below kingdom and above class. Then the person who does the phylum or who organizes groups into who organizes organisms into different groups is called a taxonomist. So a taxonomist is a biologist that identify and group organisms according to their characteristics, which we're going to be looking at the characteristics today. And those characteristics are the key features that we use to group the organisms. So as you can see, we first start with a unicellular protista, and this unicellular protista has no tissue layers, right? So we start with a unicellular protista which has no tissue layers. And then we also develop what we call a sponge. So the phylum Porifera, which the example of each is going to be sponges. And then that develops a gut opening and it forms tissue layers, right? After that, we form as a nidaria, which the example of that is going to be a jellyfish. I remember mentioning yesterday to you guys that the nidaria, they are some of them are sessile and then some of them are free living, just like the jellyfish. Then the coming generation, it develops three layers, which we refer to it as being triploblastic, and then it has bilateral symmetry, meaning that it can only be cut into um two equal parts only using one plane. But we're gonna go deeper into this as we move. So, and then it also develops civilization. And then we move to the platyhelminths, which are the example of that are flatworms. And then after that, they develop, there's something called segmentation, and they have two gut openings and they're coelomate. I'm going to explain what all this means as we go through the lecture. Then we have an arthropoda and a chordata. So the key features of body plans. So key features, as I explained, are things that we use in order to be able to group organisms into their respective group that they fall under. So for us to be able to say that this is the Porifera, these organisms fall under the phylum Porifera, then it means that we saw the key features and the body plans of those organisms. So what we use are body symmetry. We use body symmetry, and then we use civilization. Also check whether it has civilization or it does not have civilization. We also use tissue layers and the number of gut openings. We look whether it has one gut opening or it has two gut openings or it doesn't have a gut opening. And then we also look at the presence of a body cavity, right? And then when we talk about civilization, so civilization is when an organism has a definite head, and that definite head contains what? It contains sense organs. which is first seen in the phylum Platyhelminths. And as I mentioned yesterday, that once we know that, okay, civilization starts in the phylum Platyhelminths, then the rest of the things automatically, the rest of the organisms after phylum Platyhelminths are gonna have civilization. So this is just to help you guys remember that the civilization starts in phylum Platyhelminths and to help you memorize. Then we move on to sessile. So when we say an organism is sessile, it means that that organism does not move. Once it stays in a particular place, it stays there forever. So these are organisms that are immobile and attached to one place for life. And then the gut, these are portions of the alimentary canal. When they say the alimentary canal, they're speaking about the digestive system. So from your esophagus, the esophagus is the pipe that you use to swallow food down into the stomach. So that canal from the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines to the anus, that's what we refer to as the alimentary canal. So as I spoke about symmetry, we have three types of symmetry. We have asymmetry. We have asymmetry, meaning that the organism cannot be cut into two equal parts. No matter what plane you look at, this organism cannot be cut into two equal parts. And an example of that is going to be phylum Porifera, which is a sponge, a spongy. Then we have radial symmetry. Then radial symmetry, I explained yesterday that with this organism, you can cut it into two equal parts, but in different planes. So it's you can even if, for example, a ball, you can cut a ball into two equal parts in different ways. So that's what we mean when you say radial symmetry. Radial symmetry. Once there's more than one way to cut the organism into two equal parts, just know that that organism has radial symmetry. And an example of that is going to be a sea anemone. And then bilateral symmetry. So bilateral symmetry, it can also be cut into two equal parts, but only in one plane. And they made an example of a goat over here. And also human beings are an example of that because once you cut it in the same plane that they're cutting the goat, you're gonna have one hand here, one hand there, one leg there, one, unless the person has some sort of disability. But it's supposed to be this way. And then we want to look at tissue layers. So when we talk about tissue layers, these are the tissue layers that develop from an embryo are called germ layers, right? And germ layers are going to be the ones that are going to give rise to the organs. And we have, so once an organism has two germ layers, for example, it has an ectoderm and an endoderm, then that organism, we refer to it as diploblastic. So it's having a body wall that is composed of two layers, the layers being the endoderm and the ectoderm, right? But once an organism has three layers, right, we refer to that organism as triploblastic, and those layers are going to be an ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And a coelom is a fluid-filled cavity that lines the ectoderm and the endoderm and is found in triploblastic organisms. So a coelom, as I explained yesterday, it's a fluid-filled cavity that is found in between the mesoderm. So hence they say it's found between the ectoderm and the endoderm because the mesoderm is found in between those things. So if it's found in between the mesoderm, it means that it's between the ectoderm and the endoderm. And it's only found in triploblastic organisms because only triploblastic organisms have the mesoderm. So it's fluid-filled cavity that lies between the ectoderm and endoderm and is found in triploblastic organisms. And then when we talk about hydrostatic force, it's a force exerted by liquid, usually water, increased with constriction and gravity. Then when we talk about peristalsis. This is an automatic wave of muscle contraction and relaxation that moves food down in one direction through the digestive tract. So as I mentioned, that your digestive tract is made up of your esophagus, the stomach, and the intestines, right? So the alimentary canal, it needs some kind of force in order for it to be able to push food down the alimentary canal. So for it to be able to move food down that, it has to constrict and relax, constrict and relax. So it forms like a wave of constriction and relaxation that is able to move food down into out of the alimentary canal. So we have, when we talk about tissue layers, we have the primary germ layers. And the primary germ layers would be your ectoderm and your endoderm, right? The ectoderm being the outer layer and the endoderm being the inner layer, right? And the ectoderm, which is the outer layer, is going to develop into the skin or epithelium and the nervous system of an animal. So we know that the ectoderm, outer layer. So this thing, it's easy to memorize because endo, endo, once they say endo, it's inside. Once they say ecto, it's the outside. So the ectoderm will develop into the skin or epithelium and the nervous system of the animal. And then the endoderm is going to develop into the digestive system. What I was mentioning, that's going to develop into the esophagus, the stomach, and the intestines, and the anus. So that's what your endodermis will develop on. And I mentioned that animals that have two or organisms that have two germ layers, we refer to them as being diploblastic animals. So di means two, tri means three. This kind of animals do not form complex organs and are more primitive animals. So they came before. So hence I was explaining yesterday that if we know that once we have atrapoblastic animals, the atrapoblastic animal, the rest of the animals in the phylogenetic tree are gonna be triploblastic, I mean, because a diploblastic animal comes before a triploblastic animal. So we can't have a triploblastic animal as we go up in the phylogenetic tree, and then after that we can't have a triploblastic animal and then we have a diploblastic animal. So that's what I'm trying to say. So these animals do not form complex organs and are more primitive animals because I just explained that the ectoderm will form the skin, the endoderm will form the digestive system, meaning that these animals only have the skin and the digestive system. So they cannot form any complex organs like your liver, your heart, and your kidneys, all those other things, which leads us to the secondary germ layers. So a secondary germ layers is a germ layer that develops between the ectoderm and the endoderm, which we refer to it as the mesoderm, right? So we're saying the mesoderm forms between what? Forms between the ectoderm and the endoderm. So I mentioned that animals that have three tissue layers, we refer to those animals as being triploblastic, right? And this is where the fact that diploblastic animals cannot form complex organisms comes in, because now they say that the mesoderm develops into what? Into the connective tissue, bone, blood, reproductive organs, cartilage, blood, and lymphatic system. So the mesoderm is the one that's going to give rise to other things besides the alimentary canal or the digestive system and the skin. So it's going to form your connective tissue, your blood, your bone, your blood, your reproductive organs like your uterus, all the other things, cartilage, and lymphatic systems. So hence we say that triploblastic animals have complex organs because they have what? They have the mesoderm, which gives rise to all those things. And I spoke about gut and said that some animals have guts, some animals do not. So for animals that have gut, we have two types of gut. So we have one opening, which we call a blind ending gut, and we have one that have two openings, which you call a through gut. So with a blind ending gut, so it means that since it has one opening, food will be consumed, so it will be ingested in the same opening as the one that digests food. So digestion and ingestion take place in one opening. So hence they say that animals with only one opening to the gut will consume food through the mouth, the opening, which is the mouth, and excrete waste through the same opening. And so there is only one opening for both mouth and the anus. So we call this type of gut a blind ending gut. So this limits animals because it means that now animals cannot consume before they excrete the waste. So they have to consume, excrete the waste, and then consume again. So if the waste is not excreted, these animals cannot consume again, which limits animals. It limits food consumption. While we also have something called a through gut. So a through gut is a gut with two openings. So there is one opening for ingestion, there is one opening for what? For egestion or excretion. We have two openings, so we can consume food through the mouth opening and excrete waste through another opening called the anus. For example, humans, we have two openings. We have the mouth and we have the anus, right? This is an advantage to these type of organisms because it means that you don't have to wait to excrete in order to consume food again. So you can consume food as much as you want because food is going to be adjusted in the other opening, which is the anus. So they also mentioned that the sections of the digestive system can also specialize to improve efficiency of the digestive process. So they can differentiate into other things to improve things such as um, absorption of nutrients, absorption of water. I also mentioned about the coelom, which is a body cavity, a fluid-filled body cavity that is found in between the mesoderm. So animals that do not have a coelom, we refer to those animals as acoelomate. And just know that animals that have no coeloms, they can either be diproblastic or trypoblastic. But animals that have coelom, they all are trypoblastic. There is no way an animal can have two layers and then it becomes coelomate. So once an animal has two layers, just know that that animal is a coelomate. As they said here, coelomate animals. Coelomate animals may be either diploblastic or trypoblastic. Animals are usually smaller and less mobile than coelomates. And you're gonna see, I'm gonna explain why they are less mobile when we move to the next slide, I think, yes. So coelomate animals have a body cavity or coelom in their mesodermal tissue layer. So please do not confuse this. Once the coelom is lined by only one side of the mesoderm, then that animal or that organism is pseudo-coelomate because that's a false coelom. So pseudo means false coelom. Because for an animal to be coelomate, it has to be lined by both the sides. You see this red thing, the white layer is lined by both sides of the red layer. That is the what? That is the what? The mesoderm. Here it is. It's the mesoderm. And then the mesoderm lines the what? The coelom on both sides. Once it's not lined on both sides, then that animal or that organism is pseudocoelomate. Then once it doesn't have a coelom that is lined by the mesoderm, then it's acoelomate. So there are advantages of a coelom, right? So it allows more complex organ to develop, such as digestive organs, muscular system, and blood system. And I explained this when we were talking about the mesoderm, that the mesoderm is the one that's going to give rise to the other organisms, the other complex organisms, organs, I mean, the other complex organs in the body of that organism. So hence we say that because we know that once an organ has a coelom, it means that it has a mesoderm, right? So hence we're saying that it allows more complex organs to develop, such as the digestive organs, the muscular system, and the blood system. It also allows the creation of hydrostatic pressure to be generated for movement in soft-bodied animals, like your soft-bodied animals, they mean things like your worms. Because your worms do not have bones like other organisms, like humans, for example, because they do not have bones, they rely on their muscles. Um, how to explain? They rely on the interaction between the fluid that is inside them, which is the coelom, and their muscles. So the interaction between the muscle and the fluid causes what we call a hydrostatic pressure. And that hydrostatic force is going to be the one that's going to be enable the organism to move. Unlike in humans where we have bones that enable us to be able to move. So this coelom also separates the endoderm and the ectoderm from each other with the cavity, which allows layers to move independently. This allows peristalsis. I explained to you guys what peristalsis is. So as we know that the mesoderm, it gives rise to other complex organisms. Having this coelom, it enables organs. Having the coeloms enables the organs to be able to move independently of each other. Because if you don't have a coelom, it's like your organs are gonna stick to the wall. So they're gonna stick to your skin or but to the surface of that organism. So having a coelom, which is a fluid, enables them to move freely, independently of each other, and not to stick to the wall. And this allows things such as peristalsis. In some organisms, the coelomic fluid are found in the coelom, helps to transport nutrients and waste in the body. I think that is self-explanatory. So this is going to be the end of our session. I hope you guys understand this.